good stuff, and I'm going to just talk. It's going to be great. I want to hear your response to that. I feel like I've been done to sort of great because I didn't actually pull out any Greek stuff. So anyway, okay. Right. This is not a competition of wit. For the both of us. For the both of us, it's hard to resist that. But yeah, okay. So taking the notion of resistance and not resisting an evildoer. This is, again, I'm glad you also mentioned Luke's Sermon on the Plain, where he, at the end, somewhere sort of at the end of that, he says, "Why do you keep calling me Lord if you don't obey me?" And so again, I go back to obedience to his commands, which are to not resist an evil person, which I do believe is as you mentioned, it's not resisting. Don't resist evil generally, because Jesus did resist evil, even when he was tempted by Satan and taken up on the through the temptations. He was tempted and he resisted evil, that is the devil. And so this word resist actually, it has been debated what it means in terms of resistance. Antistene is the Greek, which means basically anti-state. It means to stand against. And yes, he's right. It's not mentioned elsewhere in Matthew. But it is used when James says, "Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." So yes, we are mandated to resist evil. But so, what kind of resistance is that? Probably more likely to be a whereas you mentioned that that antistene typically means to not resist the legality of some sort of accusation. I do believe that there's actually justification to say that this is could be used in the context of the Septuagint, where in the Greek New Testament, warfare and violence was always used with this word antistene, which means to stand against. So it would refer to not just somehow resisting the legal processes, but to actually resist evil. Don't resist an evil person through violent means or warfare. And I think Paul tells us also to stand against evil. In other words, we may not take violent action in terms of resistance to not, and I'm not sold on this, the corporate enemies being, but that's later, 44, but anyway. But enemies in general, we are supposed to not resist evil people violently, but we are to actually be soldiers. And instead of using the weapons of warfare, which are carnal, we don't live by the gun because we may die by the gun as Jesus instructs. But we do put on the full honor of God so that we may be able to stand. The word "stand" is used there by Paul. But historically, unfortunately, we have not been putting on spiritual armor. We've not been using spiritual weapons of warfare. Historically, the church has been in bed with the powers that be to actually act violently and take revenge instead of being admonished not to take revenge by Christ himself. Okay, lastly, let me just jump through these things. Your problems with your 4 problems. Concerns, thank you. Okay, first off, your example of, I think I've just addressed the fact that, yes, in Jesus' example of resisting the influence of profit makers and I would say capitalist people exploiting others for economic gain in the temple. He goes in with a whip, but the Greek doesn't actually tell us whether or not he was using the whip on the money changers. It says he drove them out, which could mean the livestock and the animals which were being sold for sacrifice. And even if it was Jesus actually using a whip, we are not God. So we are not sovereign in that sense. He is. He's Lord, we are not. But I do believe that there's question it's questionable to presume that he was actually beating people with a whip, as you're saying. Number two, no, he doesn't tell the centurion or any other Roman soldier to quit his job. His point in Matthew is writing to the Jews specifically, whereas Luke is writing to Gentiles and Jews, a larger audience. In Matthew is writing to the Jews to situate Jesus as a person who is upsetting the Jewish interests. He doesn't have to narrate what happened after the centurion went home and his son was healed. We don't know if he gave up his sword, as was the practice for most Christians in the military up until Constantine for 300 good years. The early church, if they were soldiers, eventually gave up their arms. The point of him saying, I've not seen any great, in all of Israel, I haven't seen greater faith than this occupying Gentile. His point in that message there was to show that a Gentile puts Jewish faith in him to shame. So the message is not about whether the guy can continue to use the sword or to work for the military, for the empire. The point is to shame the Jews for the lack of faith in trusting in him, which is what we lack also when we don't obey him to go to the nations and love our enemies. So you say that love of enemy actually trumps the other law of love for your neighbor. And I really love how you say trump there, because that just is a pretty okay, so love your neighbor as yourself is not a Christian command. Jesus didn't say love your neighbor as yourself out of his own words. He was quoting Leviticus. All world religions, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, Baha'i, the whole doctrine of Baha'i is the golden rule. To love others with reciprocal love. Do to others as you would want them to do to you. And love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, that's pretty cool. Every human does that. But I say to you, exceed the natural order of law. If there is a natural law, and by the way, that love of enemy actually would negate the love of neighbor. That was, if I'm not mistaken, Augustine's reason for just war theory. And saying that in every case you should love your enemy, except when your neighbor is at risk. Okay, I'll give you the example of someone like, for example, Corrie ten Boom's sister. She was putting her neighbors, Jews, at risk when the Nazis showed up to their door, and they knew that they were hiding Jews somewhere. And they bang on the door. Corrie ten Boom's sister says, where are you hiding the Jews? We know you've got them here. And she had at that moment, she knew, should I obey God to not tell a lie? Or should I lie and say, they're not here? She decided at the split second to obey God and then say, they're all under the kitchen table, which literally they were, because they were under a trapdoor, which is hidden under a carpet, which the kitchen table sat on top of. The Nazis go in, they don't see anything, they come back, you're crazy, they walk out. Miracles happen. My point is, when you obey God, then you are opening a door for the natural limits of natural law. Who cares about it? Because we serve a supernatural God. You are allowing the supernatural, miraculous intervention of God to come in and let him take care of vengeance. Without saying, okay, can I say one last thing? Sure. Idolatry of the cross. My flesh says to say, how dare you? Okay? How dare you say that is idolatry? The cross of Christ is the very example of excess. God sent his son how? To die. God so loved the world. How? Through self-sacrifice. He sent his only son, a begotten son, because he loved us. And what was that love for? To trump death. Okay, if we're going to say trump for anything, the cross and the resurrection both go hand in hand. You cannot have the power of the resurrection of Easter without the fellowship of his sufferings. Both of them go together. You cannot separate them. And the power of Easter is to, again, transgress the limits of the natural realm. He was transcending death, which we should also embrace, because we will also be able to die, even if, as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, even if you kill us, or if you throw us in, we know that God is powerful to save us. And even if he does not, we will not bow because of absolute obedience to Christ.
Great.
Thank you.
So, 2 years ago, 2 years ago, we were, a faculty meeting was occurring in this building, and we were in that bathroom talking.
Okay.
And
Good memory.
you'll know why I have not forgotten this.
Okay.
Because I said, at all costs, death is an enemy to be resisted.
Mm-hmm.
Your response was, sometimes people just need to die because they're old and sick.
I may have been sarcastic. I have a gifted sarcasm, but it'll continue. Sorry. That's something to be joking about. Give me a response.
No, I'm just saying that, sure, the resurrection is about the power of overcoming death. But when we were having a conversation, you made the statement when I was talking about resisting death at all costs, in terms of sickness, and in terms of praying for healing, and in terms of seeking aid, even into age. Your response was, sometimes maybe you just die. How it's possible that you were making a critique on the capitalism of insurance companies, the medical field, and all of that kind of stuff, and whatever your motivations might have been, I'm only bringing this up, Professor Wheeler, because there is some sense in your mind where you know that the death of an individual human life may not be that big of a tragedy.
Professor Wheeler, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I mean, how do I respond to that in the context of the time? My response to that is we don't fear death. Sure, we can resist death and we should maneuver in any way we can. Paul was a great example of someone who says, you can't kill me because I'm a Roman citizen to the Jews. When he goes to the Greeks, he's an identity shapeshifter and maneuvering that way. But he had a death sentence, and he said, to live is Christ, but to die is actually gain. And I think that was the mission of the early church. They invited the lions when they went into the arena. They rejoiced when they were killed, and counted it a blessing that they were able to be a witness for Christ. I think that if the church today had that limitless love for God and others, they would not be putting guns in the hands of 18-year-olds and sending them to kill, but they would be putting the word, the sword of the Spirit, in the hands of kids, discipling them and sending them to be martyrs in North Korea. Why are there no martyrs in America? Because we are complicit with protecting ourselves from the threat of death.
You have a particular understanding of martyrdom, though, Professor Wheeler. I mean, your only model for the martyr is the one who dies for the cause.
No,
But that's not the only model of martyr.
it's you and I are both Pentecostals.
Yes.
Okay? Which is okay, listen, no. We are both Pentecostals, right? And we always, I love how, we can fight over the initial evidence of the Holy Spirit. Jesus says in the book of Acts, he says, you will, when the Spirit has come upon you, you will receive power. Power to what? Speak in tongues? No. Power to heal the sick? No. You will have power to be my witnesses. Okay?